After her husband's betrayal, a renowned gynecologist moved to a remote village and bought a dilapidated house from a dying old woman. But what she found in the woman's medical records changed her destiny. Hello, my dears. Put aside your tasks for a moment. I want to tell you a story that might help you see your loved ones in a new light. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We wish you a pleasant listening experience. Helen Mitchell had always prided herself on having steady hands. In 25 years of medical practice, they had never trembled, not during the most complex surgeries when she had to extract a baby in critical condition, not when she broke the news of infertility to young couples, not even when she held a stillborn infant for the first time. A surgeon's hands are a tool, and they must be as flawless as a scalpel. But now, standing in the doorway of her own bedroom, she looked at these hands with surprise. They were shaking like autumn leaves in the wind. On the bed, which she and Ian had once chosen in an Italian showroom for 300,000 rubles, lay two people, her husband and some 25-year-old girl, a redhead with voluptuous curves that nature had generously bestowed upon her, cruelly denying the same to Helen herself. The girl was pretty, that much was undeniable, peach-colored skin without a single wrinkle, high breasts, a thin waist, everything Helen herself had once possessed, but time had mercilessly taken it all away. Lena, it's not what you think, Ian said, pulling the sheet over himself. His voice sounded tired, almost indifferent. 20 years of marriage, and he wasn't even trying to feign remorse. His face showed no shame, no embarrassment, only the irritation of a man caught red-handed. And what do I think? Helen asked, surprised at her own calmness. Why were there no tears? Why didn't she feel like screaming, smashing dishes, causing a scene? That my husband is cheating on me in our own home, in our own bed? The girl giggled, covering her mouth with a hand sporting bright pink nail polish. Oh, so you really are a doctor. Ian here keeps talking about how important and metropolitan you are, but you look so ordinary. Helen looked at herself in the wardrobe mirror, 52 years old, gray streaks in her dark hair, which she had stopped dyeing a year ago. Why bother if her husband didn't notice anyway? Tired eyes behind glasses, a white lab coat over a formal suit. Yes, she certainly didn't look like a match for this young fool. When was the last time she had bought herself something nice, gotten a manicure, looked at herself in the mirror not as a doctor but as a woman? Tell me one thing, she addressed her husband. How long has this been going on? Ian shrugged, and in that gesture was so much cynicism that Helen felt something inside her grow cold. A year, maybe a year and a half. Lena, you know yourself, it's been over between us for a long time. We've been living like neighbors in a communal apartment. Neighbors in a communal apartment. How accurately he had put it. When was the last time they had talked about anything other than household matters? Laughed together, simply sat next to each other, not buried in their phones. And does she know you're married? I know, the girl interjected, adjusting her red curls. But he says he'll get a divorce soon. We're even planning a baby. It's already happened. These were the words Helen hadn't expected. A child, what she had dreamed of 20 years ago when they had just gotten married. What never happened, despite all her medical knowledge, all the attempts, all the tears shed alone in hospital bathrooms after yet another failed IVF attempt. A baby? She repeated slowly as if pronouncing an unfamiliar word. Yes, already 3 months along. The girl was simply radiant with happiness. Ian is so happy. He says he'll finally have a real family. It was kind of boring with you. A real family. So the 20 years they had spent together weren't real, just the coexistence of two people who had once loved each other and then simply grew accustomed, like old furniture, unattractive, but a pity to throw away. Vicky, be quiet, Ian snapped at her, but there was no anger in his voice, rather tenderness, a tenderness Helen hadn't heard from him in at least 10 years. Helen turned around and walked out. She heard whispering behind her. Ian was saying something to his mistress, probably reassuring her. She heard the words, "Don't worry, everything will be fine. She won't make a scene. Not her character, not her character." How well did he know her? It was true, she never had hysterics, never smashed dishes, never staged jealous scenes. She had always been reasonable, balanced, proper. Perhaps. That was her mistake. In the hallway, she stopped, looking at the family photographs. There they were, young and happy at their wedding, Helen in a white dress, Ian in a tuxedo, both smiling genuinely. Back then, it seemed like a whole life full of love and children's laughter lay ahead. A vacation in Turkey 5 years ago. Both smiling, but the smiles were perfunctory for the camera. She remembered that vacation. They barely spoke. Each read their own book, slept in separate beds. When was the last time she had genuinely laughed with her husband? "Lena, wait!" Ian rushed out of the bedroom in his robe. "Let's talk properly." About what? Helen was putting on her coat. About you finding yourself a young and fertile woman. Congratulations, sincerely. No need for sarcasm. You're an intelligent woman, you understand. We can't go on like this. I need a real life. Then live. Tomorrow I'll file for divorce. Ian nodded with relief, and that nod hurt Helen. So this was all he had been waiting for. How long had he been suffering, not knowing how to tell her the truth? "I won't stand in your way. The apartment stays with me. It's in my name, the dacha too. But I'm not greedy. I'll leave you your savings." Helen smirked. How simple it was in his head. 20 years of shared life, and he had already divided everything up. I wonder how long he had been planning this. Had he consulted a lawyer? Discussed it with red-haired Vicky? "Fine," she said. "Just tell me honestly, was I such a bad wife?" Ian was taken aback for a second. Apparently he hadn't expected such a question. "Not bad. We just became strangers. You're always at work. Shifts, surgeries, sick patients. I'm on business trips, negotiations, new projects. But with Vicky, with her, I feel alive again. Young. Vicky. Even her name is young, ringing, not like the stern Helen. And what could she say? That work was her calling, that she saves lives, that every day she helps women become mothers. Ian wouldn't understand. For him, work was a way to earn money, not the meaning of life. "I see," she said, and walked out onto the landing. Only in the elevator, when the doors closed, did Helen allow herself to cry. Not from pain. Strangely, there was almost no pain. More from relief. Finally, it was over. Finally, she didn't have to pretend they were a family, didn't have to cook dinner for a husband who came home drunk and indifferent at 10 p.m., didn't have to wash his shirts, buy groceries, smile at his colleagues at corporate parties. Outside, it was October, golden and sad. Leaves rustled underfoot. The air was transparent with that special autumn smell that always reminded her of school, childhood, a time when her whole life was ahead. Helen got into her car, an old but reliable Volkswagen she had bought with her own money 5 years ago, and she drove nowhere. Just drove through New York, thinking about what would come next. Work. The prestigious mother and child clinic where she headed the department. But suddenly it seemed she wasn't needed there either. Young colleagues glanced at her sideways, an old maid who treats women's diseases but never experienced motherhood herself. They didn't say it out loud, but she saw pity in their eyes, especially when she gave advice on pregnancy and childbirth. An apartment in downtown New York, a career, money in the bank, she had all that. But what for if there was no one to share it with? Why save money if there was no one to spend it on? Why build a career if there was no one to be proud of your successes? By evening, she arrived home. No, not home anymore, but the apartment where her ex-husband lived with his pregnant mistress. She packed her things, documents, money. Ian and Vicky were chatting cheerfully in the kitchen. She heard their laughter. When was the last time she had laughed like that? The bedroom smelled of foreign perfume, sweet, cloying, youthful. Helen packed her things, formal suits, medical coats, comfortable shoes, medical books. Her entire life fit into 2 suitcases. Strange how little remained from 20 years of shared life. In the morning, Helen went to the clinic and submitted her resignation. The chief physician, Caleb Allen, with whom she had worked for 15 years, almost choked on his coffee. "Lena, are you crazy? You're our best specialist. Patients only book appointments with you." "Caleb Allen, I'm tired," she admitted. "I need to rest. Take a leave, even for 6 months, but don't resign." Colleagues were surprised, tried to persuade her to stay, but she was adamant. A young doctor, Natasha, who had recently joined the department, asked, "Helen Mitchell, what will you do? Where will you go?" "I don't know," Helen answered honestly. "Maybe I'll find a new place in another clinic, in another life." After work, she went to a car dealership and bought a used but sturdy larger car, a Subaru with all-wheel drive for long trips. The salesman, a young guy with enthusiasm in his eyes, asked about her plans. "Where are you headed? To the country house? On vacation?" "Far from New York," Helen answered. "Somewhere quiet." "And your family?" "Your husband doesn't mind." "I have no family," she said, and the words sounded like a verdict. "No husband either." The guy was embarrassed, but quickly collected himself. "I see. Well, the car is good, reliable, will go anywhere. Just be careful on the roads. It's autumn, slippery." Helen nodded. "Be careful on the roads." Good advice. Pity there were no warning signs in life, no traffic lights that would have stopped her 20 years ago and made her think, is it worth marrying a man who doesn't share your interests, who yawns when you talk about work, who thinks a woman should stay home and bear children? That evening she sat in the empty apartment. Ian and Vicky had gone to a restaurant to celebrate their freedom, and thought about the future. 52 years old wasn't that old, but it wasn't young either. Could one start life over at that age, or was that only for those in their 20s? She opened her laptop and started looking for house listings, not in New York, but farther away, in the countryside, somewhere quiet, peaceful, unhurried, where she wouldn't have to rush to work, smile at patients, pretend everything was fine. The first listing, selling a house in the village of Riverbend, upstate New York. Old, needs repairs, inexpensive, negotiable. Helen clicked the link and saw pictures of a lopsided wooden house with a leaky roof. It looked as sad as she felt. Maybe they would suit each other. The drive to Riverbend took several hours. Helen drove slowly, taking in the landscapes outside the window. First came the suburban cottage communities with their showy wealth, high fences, security guards, expensive cars at the gates. Then came ordinary villages, neat little houses, vegetable gardens, occasional passers-by. And the farther from New York, the sadder the picture became. Abandoned houses with boarded-up windows, plots overgrown with weeds, sagging fences. The GPS lost signal several times, and Helen had to stop to ask locals for directions. An elderly woman at a bus stop, seeing the New York license plates, shook her head. "Riverbend? What would you want there, dear? Hardly anyone's left there, just old folks waiting to die." "How do I get there?" Helen asked persistently. "Turn at the store, then straight to the woods. You'll see it. But the road is bad, especially after rains." The road was indeed terrible. The last 10 kilometers Helen drove at a turtle's pace, avoiding potholes the size of small lakes. The Subaru handled it, but every jolt sent a pain through her lower back. She thought that in New York such a road would be repaired in a week, but here apparently everyone had forgotten about it. Riverbend greeted her with silence. The village was indeed dying. Of several dozen houses, more than half stood empty. Some had collapsed roofs, others had windows boarded up. Only a few houses showed lights. Smoke rose from the chimneys. Helen slowly drove down the only street, looking at the houses. Which one was for sale? She stopped at the only store, a tiny wooden building with a peeling sign that said groceries. Behind the counter sat a woman in her 60s knitting something from gray wool. "Hello," Helen entered. "I'm looking for the house that's for sale. I saw an ad online." The woman put down her knitting and examined the stranger from head to toe. "Grace Green's house? And who might you be? A relative?" "No, I just want to buy it for myself." "For yourself?" The saleswoman was surprised. "Where are you from?" "The city." "From New York." "Oh, from New York." The woman threw up her hands. "What did you forget in our backwoods? There's nothing here, no work, no entertainment. All the young people have left for the cities, only pensioners remain." "I need quiet right now," Helen explained. "Can you tell me where this house is?" "Grace Green lives at the end of the village, the last house before the woods. But she's very sick, might not understand anything. She has a son, but he rarely visits." Helen thanked her and drove on. The house indeed stood at the end of the village, separated from the neighbors by a large plot. 2-story, once painted blue, now peeling and gray. The roof sagged, some boards in the fence were missing, the gate hung on one hinge. But there was something cozy, homely about this house, perhaps the large windows with carved frames or the old apple tree in the front garden. Helen knocked on the door. No one answered for a long time. Then slow footsteps were heard and a cautious voice. "Who's there?" "Hello, my name is Helen. I'm here about selling the house." The door opened a crack and a tiny old woman appeared on the threshold leaning on a stick. Gray hair neatly braided, eyes surprisingly clear for her age. "About the house?" the old woman asked. "Who told you I'm selling?" "I saw an ad online." "Online?" The old woman clearly didn't understand. "Oh, yes, my son must have posted it. Come in, come in. Why stand out in the cold?" Inside, the house turned out to be unexpectedly warm and cozy. Old furniture, but sturdy, not cheap mass-produced stuff, but real wooden cabinets and dressers. Lace doilies on the tables, many books on the shelves, photographs in frames. It smelled of pies and old books. "Grace Green Koltsova," the hostess introduced herself, seating the guest at the table. "And what's your name, dear?" "Helen Mitchell." "Mitchell?" She misheard the surname. "Mitchell. And what do you do?" "I'm a gynecologist." "A doctor?" Grace Green beamed. "How wonderful. We haven't had doctors here for a long time. Only the paramedic, Jack Hill, comes once a week, and even he, She waved her hand. "Would you like some tea?" Helen wanted to refuse, but the old woman was already bustling by the stove. The tea turned out to be strong, aromatic, with jam from some unknown berry. "And why do you want our house?" Grace Green asked, looking intently at the guest. "You're still young and beautiful. In New York you must have a good job, a decent salary." Helen thought about what to say. The truth? That her husband left her for a young pregnant woman? That work had become hateful? That life seemed empty and meaningless? "I'm tired of the city," she said simply. "I want quiet." "I understand," the old woman nodded. "And family? Husband? Children?" "No. None at all?" "None at all." Grace Green was silent for a while, studying the guest. "And why do you need a house? Life here is hard. No amenities, no gas, no running water. Need to chop firewood, heat the stove. In winter they don't clear the roads. You can only get to the store on skis." "It's okay, I'll get used to it. You're still too young for such a life." I'm over 80, I don't care anymore. But you, aren't you going to remarry?" "I'm not," Helen said firmly. "Ah, what a pity. It's hard alone, especially when you're sick." "Are you sick?" Grace Green sighed. "Who isn't at my age? My heart acts up, blood pressure jumps. And recently the paramedic said something terrible." She fell silent, as if frightened by her own words. "What did he say?" "Oh, nothing special. Says my tests are bad, need to go to the hospital, but I'm afraid of hospitals. They put old people there, but they don't discharge them home. Helen became alert. Something in the old woman's words bothered her. What diagnosis could a rural paramedic give an elderly woman? What exactly did he say? What diagnosis? Oh, I don't remember already. He used such complicated words. Something about the stomach, says I need an operation, but at my age. Grace Green waved her hand. So my son decided to sell the house, says, come live with me in the city. And do you want to go to the city? I don't. My whole life is here. I worked at the school for 40 years, taught children. My husband is buried in the local cemetery. How can I leave him? There was such longing in the old woman's voice that Helen felt sorry for her. A familiar situation. Elderly parents are taken away to cities far from their familiar lives, their memories. Can you show me the house? Of course, just excuse the mess. It's all old stuff here. My son says we'll throw it all out anyway. The house turned out to be larger than it seemed from outside. Downstairs, a large kitchen, living room, and another room Grace Green called the hall. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms and a storage room. Everywhere there was old but sturdy furniture, books, family photographs. There were problems, stains on the ceiling, creaky floors, old wiring. But the house was alive, lived in. How much do you want for the house? Helen asked. My son said. Grace Green hesitated. A few $100,000, but please don't be angry. It's probably expensive. Helen almost laughed. In New York, that kind of money might buy a garage, but here it was a whole house with land. I agree, she said, but I have one condition. What is it? You stay living here with me. The house is big. There's enough room. Grace Green was taken aback. How's that? You buy the house and I stay? I buy the house and you help me get used to country life. Teach me to heat the stove, plant a garden, and I'll look after your health. Oh, come now. Why would you want an old woman underfoot? Not an old woman, but a wise woman. I'll feel better knowing I'm not alone in an unfamiliar place. Grace Green's eyes glistened with tears. Goodness, really? But what will I tell my son? We'll tell your son the house is sold and you're temporarily looking after the buyer until she settles in. And how long are you planning to stay? Forever, Helen said, and felt lighter at these words. Forever. No return to the past life. They agreed that Helen would return in a week with her things and money while she went to New York to arrange the documents and gather her belongings. The return journey seemed shorter. Helen thought about what lay ahead, life in the village, heating with a wood stove, a vegetable garden, canning for winter, all things she had never known how to do and never wanted to learn. But for some reason, the prospect didn't frighten her, it delighted her. In New York, she was met by an empty apartment. Ian and Vicky had moved out somewhere. Apparently, they decided not to wait for the divorce. On the kitchen table lay a note. Lena, take your things by the end of the week. I'll throw out the rest. And the rest I'll throw out. 20 years of shared life. Just the rest that can be thrown out. Helen folded the note and threw it in the trash, let it lie there with the remnants of their marriage. In a week, she packed her things, arranged the documents for buying the house, went to a notary. Colleagues from the clinic called, trying to persuade her to return, offering a raise. The chief physician even came to her home. Lena, come to your senses. You're not a peasant. What will you do in the village? Live, she answered simply. And if you get bored, if you get sick, if you run out of money, then I'll come back. But for now, I want to try. He shook his head and left, muttering something about a midlife crisis and female foolishness. When Helen closed the door of the New York apartment for the last time, she didn't look back. Her past life remained behind that door. Ahead awaited a new, unfamiliar, but her own life. The first month in Riverbend flew by like a single day. Helen threw herself into her new life, learning to heat the stove, clearing out the attic, trying to understand how country living worked. Grace Green turned out to be a patient mentor, though she often shook her head watching the clumsy attempts of the city guests to handle the simplest rural tasks. "No, dear, you don't stack the firewood like that," she'd say, watching Helen try to light the stove. First wood shavings, then thin kindling, and only then logs. And leave more air or the fire will suffocate. Helen obediently redid it, getting her hands dirty with soot and smoke. In New York, she could perform the most complex operations, but here she couldn't handle an ordinary stove. Strangely, this helplessness didn't irritate her, it amused her. It was as if she was learning to live all over again. In a month, the house noticeably transformed. Helen hired local men who fixed the roof and replaced rotten boards, installed new wiring, put in a septic tank, connected satellite internet. Grace Green initially resisted the innovations, but when the house became warm and dry and real hot water came from the taps, she relented. "How good it is now," she admitted, "and I thought I'd live out my days with that leak over the bed." The village residents regarded the new inhabitant with curiosity and caution. A woman from New York, a doctor without a husband, an unusual figure for these parts. For the first few weeks, the neighbors greeted her reservedly. They watched from a distance as Helen puttered around the yard. But when the wife of the local tractor driver, Valentina, cut her hand while canning cucumbers and Helen professionally treated the wound and put in stitches, their attitude changed. "A real doctor," the women whispered. "Golden hands and so kind. Didn't take any money, just said to change the bandage tomorrow." Word of the city doctor quickly spread throughout the area. People began coming to Helen with various problems, some with back pain, others with high blood pressure. She didn't refuse anyone, though she understood she was working illegally, but her heart wouldn't let her turn away from people who needed help. She was particularly concerned about Grace Green's condition. The old woman grew weaker each day, tired quickly, ate poorly, complained of stomach pains. Helen offered to examine her several times, but Grace Green brushed her off. "Oh dear, don't bother. I'm old. I'm 74. No, 84. I keep mixing it up. Anyway, at my age, everyone gets sick." "Grace Green, at least let me check your blood pressure or do some tests." "Tests?" The old woman was frightened. No, Jack Hill said it's better not to know. What's the use of suffering?" Jack Hill was the local paramedic who came to the village once a week to see patients in the former village council building. Helen had seen him from a distance a few times. A man around 45, somewhat overweight with a perpetually displeased face. The neighbors didn't speak of him with particular enthusiasm. "Not much use from him," complained Valentina, whose hand Helen had stitched. Came to him with back pain, he prescribed pills and said, "At your age, what do you expect? And I'm only 48. "And what about Grace Green?" Helen asked carefully. "I heard she has serious problems." "Oh, it's scary to say." Valentina lowered her voice. "He gave her such a diagnosis, stomach cancer last stage, says she has 6 months to live, no more. So she decided to sell the house and move to her son's." Helen became alert. Stomach cancer in its final stage, that wasn't the symptoms she observed in Grace Green. Yes, the old woman was weak, but not as weak as someone with terminal cancer should be. "And when did he make this diagnosis?" "About 3 months ago, after some tests." "Was Grace Green in the hospital?" "No, Jack Hill took the tests himself, took them to the district hospital. Then he came and said, 'It's all bad. Prepare.'" Something about this story didn't add up. Helen decided to delicately question Grace Green herself, but the old woman avoided the conversation each time. Only one evening, as they sat in the kitchen over tea, did she confess, "I'm afraid, Helen Mitchell, not of death. At my age one must prepare for it, but I'm afraid I'll suffer." Jack Hill said there would be terrible pain. Nothing will help. Do you have strong pain now? Not really. Sometimes my stomach aches, but it's tolerable, and he says this is just the beginning. Helen struggled to contain her opinion about the paramedic's diagnosis, but without an examination, she couldn't say anything definitively. A few days later, an opportunity arose to meet Jack Hill personally. He came to the village for a scheduled appointment, and the locals told him about the new resident. So you're a doctor? He examined Helen from head to toe. What's your specialty? Gynecology. Women's issues, I see. Well then, colleague, welcome to our backwoods. Just don't steal my patients, he laughed. But the laugh was unpleasant with a hint of malice. I'm retired, Helen lied. Retired? The paramedic was surprised. But you look young. Well, all right, everyone decides for themselves. By the way, I heard you're living with Grace Green. How is she? Not suffering too much? Seems all right. What's wrong with her? Jack Hill lowered his voice. Oncology, stomach, last stage. I don't tell her the truth, of course. Why upset an old person? But you're a doctor, you understand. Are you sure about the diagnosis? Of course, she had all the tests, even a biopsy. Everything's confirmed. A pity, of course. She was a good woman, but at her age... Helen nodded, but inside she tensed. Something was wrong. A stomach biopsy is a serious procedure not done in district hospitals just like that. And Grace Green's symptoms didn't match the diagnosis. That evening, she decided to have a frank conversation with the old woman. Grace Green, show me your medical documents. I want to understand what treatment you were prescribed. What documents? Well, test results, hospital discharge papers, referrals. Oh, where are they? Grace Green waved her hands. Jack Hill took everything, says he needs them for reporting. He took everything. Well, not everything. Something's left. In the dresser, in the bottom drawer. But don't be upset if you read something terrible. Helen went to Grace Green's bedroom and opened the indicated drawer. Among old photographs and documents lay a small stack of medical papers. She took them and returned to the kitchen. The first thing she found was a complete blood count from 3 months ago. Helen studied the numbers carefully and felt her heart tighten. These tests showed no cancer. Yes, hemoglobin was slightly low, which is typical for elderly women, but there were no oncological markers at all. The next document was a referral for a gastroscopy. The endoscopist's conclusion read superficial gastritis, no signs of neoplasms detected, diet and medication therapy recommended. Helen reread the conclusion several times. Superficial gastritis, the most common condition, easily treated, no cancer, no last stages. Grace Green, she called in a trembling voice, come here. The old woman appeared in the doorway, leaning on her stick. What happened? You're so pale. Sit down. I need to tell you something. Grace Green sat at the table, looking anxiously at the medical papers in Helen's hands. You don't have cancer, Helen said directly. There's no cancer and never was. You have ordinary gastritis that's perfectly treatable. How can that be? The old woman didn't understand. But Jack Hill said, Jack Hill lied to you. Look for yourself. Helen showed her the endoscopist's report. She explained what all the medical terms meant. Grace Green listened with wide eyes. But why? She whispered. Why would he tell me untruths? That's what I need to find out, Helen said firmly. She thought all night, trying to understand the paramedic's logic. Why would a medical professional deceive a patient? What benefit did he get from an old woman believing she was terminally ill? In the morning, a neighbor came to her, Zephyr Adams, a woman in her 70s. Helen Mitchell, she said, sitting at the table. I want to ask you something. Just don't be angry. Ask away. Is it true that Grace Green doesn't have any cancer? Helen was surprised. How do you know? Well, she was telling everyone this morning, says you cured her. And I was thinking, Zephyr Adams paused. He found something terrible in me, too. What did he find? My heart, he says, is very bad. I'll have a heart attack if I don't get treatment. And the treatment is expensive, only done in New York. So I decided to sell my house, raise money for treatment. Helen became alert. Do you have documents, test results? I have some things. Jack Hill didn't take everything. An hour later, Helen was studying the medical documents of another terminally ill patient. And again, no signs of serious pathology, just age-related changes that people live with for years. A picture was beginning to form, and it was frightening. Helen took out a notebook and started writing down everything she knew about paramedic Allen's activities. Gradually, a scheme of fraud emerged that made her blood run cold. By evening, she had a list of 5 families to whom Jack Hill had given fatal diagnoses, and all these families had either already sold their houses for a pittance or were planning to do so. Part 4. The next 2 weeks Helen spent like a private detective. She cautiously questioned neighbors, studied medical documents people had kept, analyzed the fraud scheme. The picture became increasingly clear and terrifying. The Ivanov family sold their house a year ago after Jack Hill discovered liver cirrhosis in the head of the family. In reality, the man suffered from ordinary gastritis caused by irregular eating. The house was bought by some entrepreneur from the regional center for a few 100,000 rubles, though its real value was much higher. The Ashworth, an elderly couple, gave up their homestead for a few 100,000 after a diagnosis of lung cancer for the husband. The fluoroscopy results, which Helen managed to obtain through a radiologist acquaintance, showed only age-related changes and traces of long-healed pneumonia. The widow Nora Prescott was preparing to sell her house after a discovered brain tumor. When Helen asked to see the MRI results, it turned out the old woman had never had an MRI. Jack Hill said it was clear from the symptoms. The most terrible discovery awaited Helen when she decided to check the fate of the sold houses. All of them, a few months after purchase, were resold for completely different money, from 1.5 to 3 million rubles. The buyers turned out to be frontmen, and the real beneficiary was one Mr. Gonzalez, a businessman from Texas involved in buying up land for cottage communities. Helen discovered the connection between Garcia and Allen by chance. Browsing the paramedic's social media, she came across a photo from a corporate party where Jack Hill was hugging an unfamiliar man. The caption read, "With my best business partner." A reverse image search led to Garcia's profile. The scheme was simple and cynical. Allen chose lonely elderly people with valuable real estate, ordered examinations at the district hospital, and then reported terrible diagnoses. Frightened old people sold their houses to the first buyers who conveniently appeared right after the diagnosis. The buyers were always different. Sometimes a young family from the regional center, sometimes a private investor, sometimes a farmer wanting to expand his operation. But ultimately, all the houses ended up owned by firms connected to Oleg Garcia, and a year or two later, cottage communities for wealthy Muscovites began to be built on the sites of the village homesteads. The most shocking discovery awaited Helen in the district hospital archives. She arranged for a doctor acquaintance from Moscow to request some documents for consultation. It turned out that many of the tests Allen referred to were either never conducted at all or their results were falsified. In some cases, the paramedics simply forged stamps and doctors' signatures. "This is outright fraud," her Moscow colleague was outraged. How could he pull off these machinations for so long? "He has patrons," Helen explained. "Surely someone in the district leadership gets their cut." Meanwhile, Allen wasn't sitting idle. Within a week of their conflict, unpleasant rumors began reaching Helen. The saleswoman at the store suddenly became cold and unwelcoming. Neighbors began avoiding her, some even stopped greeting her. Helen Mitchell, the tractor driver's wife Valentina, said cautiously one day, "Maybe you shouldn't be so actively interested in other people's business. People are saying things." "What exactly are they saying?" Well, that you're a city outsider, maybe don't understand our ways. And Jack Hill? He's local, everyone knows him. What do they know about him? Valentina hesitated. They say you're discouraging Grace Green from treatment, that because of you she might die. Helen understood that Alan had launched an information war against her. He was spreading rumors that the Moscow doctor was interfering with the treatment of local residents, that people could die from untreated illnesses because of her interference. The situation worsened when an inspection from the district administration came to the village. 3 officials in expensive suits visited several houses asking about the new resident and her activities. Citizen Ms. Sawyer, the main inspector, who introduced himself as the deputy head of the district for social issues, addressed Helen. We have information that you are engaged in illegal medical practice. I am not engaged in medical practice, Helen answered firmly. I simply consult neighbors about medical documents. Do you have a license for medical activity in our region? I'm not practicing medicine, but local residents claim you make diagnoses, prescribe treatment, refute the conclusions of qualified specialists. I study medical documents and see discrepancies in diagnoses. Discrepancies? The official smirked. Are you a specialist in oncology, gastroenterology, cardiology? I am a doctor with 25 years of experience. I can read tests and see inconsistencies. I see. But you are creating conflict situations, interfering with the work of medical institutions. Perhaps you should reconsider your behavior. The threat was veiled but understandable. Helen understood that a whole system was being built against her, from the paramedic to the district administration. But there was no retreating. Too many people had suffered. Too many fates had been broken. After the inspectors left, Grace Green cried, Helen Mitchell, maybe it's really not worth getting involved. What if they harm you? What if there are problems? Grace Green, if I hadn't come, what would have happened to you? Well, I would have sold the house, moved to my son's, and died there of melancholy and uselessness. And Jack Hill would have gotten his 30 pieces of silver. But he's a doctor. He has education, experience. Education, yes, but conscience, it seems, he lost somewhere along the way. Helen understood that she needed allies. She couldn't handle a whole corruption system alone, and such an ally was found in the most unexpected place. Luke Lopez, the director of the local school, came to her himself, a man of medium years, intelligent face, tired but with kind eyes. Helen Mitchell, he said, sitting at the kitchen table, I want to talk with you. I'm listening. I've heard about your disagreements with Jack Hill, and I want to say, you are right. Helen was surprised. How do you know? My wife died 2 years ago. Breast cancer, real, not made up. The last month she suffered from pain, and Alan refused to prescribe strong painkillers. Said she needed to endure, or she'd get addicted. A woman is dying of cancer, and he's worried about morphine addiction. I remember your wife, Grace Green said quietly. She was a good woman. Hazel Carter. Yes, Luke Lopez nodded. And after her death, I started paying attention to our paramedics' work and noticed a strange pattern. All his terminally ill patients somehow sell their houses to the same buyers. Have you checked this? Of course, I'm not just a school director, but also a deputy of the rural settlement. I have access to some documents, and you know what I found? Oleg Garcia, the main beneficiary of all these deals, turns out to be the cousin of our district head. Helen whistled softly. Family connections explained a lot, both the patronage of Alan and the district administration's reluctance to look into his activities. What do you propose? She asked. We need to go above the district level to the regional prosecutor's office, the regional health department. Garcia doesn't have relatives there. And you'll help? I'll help, but on one condition. We must be absolutely sure of our evidence. One mistake is enough for them to accuse us of slander. The next 2 weeks, Helen and Luke Lopez worked like real investigators. They systematized all the facts, collected testimony from victims, made copies of documents. Through his connections in educational circles, Luke Lopez reached out to doctors from the regional center who confirmed that many of Alan's diagnoses were fabricated. Simultaneously, they carefully prepared the ground among local residents. Luke Lopez enjoyed great authority in the district. He had been school director for 20 years. He was respected by both children and parents. When he started telling people about the paramedics' machinations, many finally decided to voice their suspicions openly. "We always suspected something," a primary school teacher admitted. "It was very suspicious. A person finds out about an illness and immediately sells the house, and buyers appear as if from underground." "And remember Lachlan Shepard from Brooklyn," the librarian added. "Alan told him he had prostate cancer. The old man was so scared he sold his house for $300,000, and now they say he's living in Texas, healthy as an ox." Gradually, a coalition against Alan was forming. People understood that they had been deceived, that their fellow villagers had been driven out of their native places under false pretenses. But the paramedic wasn't napping either. He understood that serious accusations were being prepared against him and was preparing a defense. Through his patrons, he tried to put pressure on Luke Lopez. A commission from the district came to the school for an inspection. They nitpicked every little thing: document formatting, curriculum plans, the condition of the premises. Luke Lopez was hinted that his work didn't meet modern requirements and that perhaps he should consider younger personnel. "They want to remove me," he told Helen after another inspection. "If I'm dismissed from my position, I'll lose all authority in the district." "Then we need to act faster," Helen decided. They agreed that the following week they would go to the regional center, straight to the prosecutor's office and the health department. They had enough evidence. Witnesses were ready to testify. But Alan got ahead of them. On Friday evening, a car from the district hospital pulled up to Helen's house. The paramedic and 2 unfamiliar men in white coats got out. "Helen Mitchell," Alan announced solemnly, "we have reason to believe you require psychiatric examination." "On what grounds?" "Complaints have been received from local residents about your inadequate behavior. You spread false information about doctors, interfere with the treatment of patients, show signs of persecution mania." Helen understood that this was Alan's last attempt to get her out of the way. Forced hospitalization in a psychiatric hospital would automatically discredit all her accusations. "I refuse the examination," she said firmly. "Unfortunately, refusal is impossible. We have a referral from the district chief physician." "Show me the documents." Alan handed her a paper with stamps and signatures. The referral was formatted according to all rules, listing symptoms of delusional disorder and delusions of grandeur. "This is a forgery," Helen said after studying the document. "This is an official referral. Come with us voluntarily and it will all be civilized." At that moment, Grace Green came out of the house. "What's happening?" "Helen Mitchell, what do they want?" "They want to take me to a psychiatric hospital," Helen explained. "A psychiatric hospital?" The old woman was horrified. "But she's the most sensible person I know." "Grace Green, don't interfere," Alan said. "These are medical matters." "These are criminal matters, not medical ones," the old woman suddenly shouted so loudly that the neighbors heard. "He's a crook, a deceiver, kicks people out of their homes, gives false diagnoses." Her cries attracted attention. People started coming out of neighboring houses. A crowd gathered, about 15 people. "What happened?" the neighbors asked. "Wait, Grace Green, why are you shouting?" Encouraged by the support, the old woman continued to expose the paramedic. "He told me I had cancer, and Helen Mitchell looked at the documents. There's no cancer, just ordinary gastritis, and this crook was forcing me to sell my house for pennies." The crowd buzzed. People looked at each other, remembering their own suspicions. "And Maria also said she was deceived," a woman's voice said. And Ivan, too, Abe Mann's voice added. Alan realized the situation was getting out of control. Citizens, disperse. These are official matters. What official matters? Valentina was outraged. You deceive people, kick them out of their homes. I'm not deceiving anyone. I work honestly. Honestly? Luke Lopez appeared in the crowd. Then explain why all your terminally ill patients sell their houses to the same buyer? How do you know that? Alan snapped. We checked, the school director answered calmly, and not only checked, but were planning to go to the prosecutor's office. The crowd buzzed approvingly. Alan was at a loss. His plan had failed, and the accusations against him had been made publicly. This is all slander. He tried to save the situation. They've conspired against me. Then prove we're lying, Helen challenged. Show us Grace Green's real test results. Explain why she has gastritis instead of cancer. The paramedic didn't answer. He understood he was trapped. With his assistance, he quickly got into the car and drove away, leaving Helen and the gathered villagers to celebrate their first victory. But Helen understood. This was only the beginning. The real battle was still ahead. Part 5. After Alan's public exposure, real ferment began in the village. People who had been silent about their suspicions for years finally decided to speak openly. More and more people came to Helen and Luke Lopez with stories about strange diagnoses, pressure to sell houses, suspicious buyers. 70-year-old Klavdia Nikolaevna from the neighboring village of Olshanka told a story that made blood run cold. Alan had diagnosed her grandson, a teenage boy, with leukemia. The frightened grandmother sold her house for 350,000 rubles, planning to take the boy to New York for treatment. But when they arrived at the Speransky Children's Hospital, it turned out the teenager had ordinary anemia caused by poor nutrition. I still don't understand how he could make such a diagnosis, Klavdia Nikolaevna cried. The boy was healthy. A bit pale, sure, but he's always been that way, and this monster said that if treatment didn't start immediately, the child would die in a month. Where are you living now? Helen asked. We rent a room in the district center. My grandson goes to the local school. And your house? The old woman smiled bitterly. There's some rich dacha there now, a high fence, mean dogs. You can't even come close to look at where I spent my childhood. There were more than 20 such stories, each one a broken fate, a destroyed family, a lost home. Helen wrote everything down in a thick notebook that Grace Green called the Book of People's Sorrows. Meanwhile, through his connections in educational circles, Luke Lopez gathered information about the fraud scheme at the regional level. It turned out similar cases had occurred not only in their district. In neighboring districts, there were also paramedics and doctors who gave false diagnoses to elderly people, and their real estate ended up in the hands of various construction firms. This is a whole network, he told Helen one evening as they sat in Grace Green's kitchen going through another stack of documents. I contacted colleagues from other districts. There are similar cases everywhere where cottage communities or tourist bases are planned. So it's not just Alan's local initiative? No, this is organized criminal activity. Someone is coordinating the whole scheme from above. Grace Green, who had been listening carefully to their conversation, suddenly said, Remember, last year some people from the region came, looked at the land, measured something. When was this? Helen became interested. In summer or late spring. I don't remember exactly. An important-looking man in an expensive suit, with a few others, said they would build a tourist base here. Did Alan communicate with them? Yes, of course. He even invited them to his house. My garden is next to his house. I saw them sitting in the yard discussing something. Helen and Luke Lopez exchanged glances. Another confirmation that the paramedic was not an independent figure, but part of a larger scheme. A week before the planned trip to the regional center, an event occurred that changed the whole situation. A journalist from the regional newspaper arrived in the village, Sutton Harris, a middle-aged woman, energetic and purposeful. She investigated corruption schemes in healthcare. Colleagues from the teaching community told me about your problems, she explained to Luke Lopez. If what you claim is true, this is material for a major publication. The journalist turned out to be a true professional. She methodically interviewed all the victims, studied documents, checked information about real estate transactions. Most of all, she was interested in the connections between various buyers and construction firms. I have a source in the land registry, she told Helen. He'll help trace the entire chain of resales. If my suspicions are confirmed, we're dealing with fraud on a particularly large scale. 3 days later, Sutton Harris returned with sensational data. Over the past few years, numerous plots in various villages throughout the region had been bought up through front men. The total value of the transactions amounted to tens of millions of rubles, though the real value of the land was several times higher. But the most interesting thing isn't that, the journalist said, spreading printouts of documents on the table. The main thing is who stands behind this whole scheme. It turned out Oleg Garcia was only an intermediate link. The real beneficiary was a group of companies called Free Pool Corp., which specialized in creating elite suburban communities for wealthy clients from New York and St. Petersburg. The owner of the group of companies was Mr. Nelson, a deputy of the Regional Assembly and a major entrepreneur. Mr. Remington? Luke Lopez said thoughtfully. I've heard that name somewhere. He was recently elected to the Regional Assembly, the journalist explained, campaigning as a defender of the interests of rural residents and a fighter for tourism development in the region. The irony of the situation was obvious. A man who publicly advocated for the development of rural territories was actually engaged in evicting local residents from their land. And what about Alan? Helen asked. Is he just an executor, or does he also get serious money? According to my information, paramedics get from 50 to 100,000 rubles for each successful case, plus a monthly salary from Mr. Remington for consulting services. A nice salary for a rural paramedic, Luke Lopez remarked grimly. Sutton Harris planned to publish the material in a week, but before publication she needed to get comments from all the individuals involved, including Mr. Remington himself. I understand this could be dangerous for you, she told Helen and Luke Lopez. As soon as the article comes out, you'll face serious pressure. Are you ready for that? We're ready, Helen said firmly. Too many people have suffered. We can't let this continue. And I've spent my whole life teaching children honesty and justice, Luke Lopez added. How can I remain silent now, knowing the truth? Meanwhile, word of the journalist's visit reached Alan. He understood the situation was becoming critical and decided to strike preemptively. A statement was filed with the district prosecutor's office accusing Helen Ms. Sawyer and Levi Taylor of slander. The statement claimed they were spreading false information about an honest doctor, damaging his reputation and interfering with his professional duties. The summons to the prosecutor's office arrived on Monday morning. Helen and Luke Lopez were to appear for questioning as suspects under the article Slander. This is their last attempt to intimidate us, Luke Lopez said. But we have evidence. We haven't said anything we can't back up with documents. The main thing is not to fall for provocations, Sutton Harris advised. Answer only direct questions. Don't let them draw you into discussions. At the prosecutor's office, they were received by an assistant prosecutor, a young man around 30, who clearly had no desire to deal with a complex case. You understand, he said, flipping through the materials. We have a statement from a medical worker that you are spreading false information about him. This is a serious accusation. And we have documents confirming our words, Helen answered calmly, placing a folder with copies of medical reports on the table. The assistant prosecutor reluctantly began studying the documents. His face showed he understood. The case was much more serious than it initially seemed. These documents Where did you get them? The patients provided them themselves. People have the right to know the content of their medical documents. And this document, he lifted one of the certificates. It says superficial gastritis here, but the applicant claims he diagnosed stomach cancer. That's exactly the problem, Luke Lopez explained. The paramedic tells patients one thing, but the documents say something completely different. But this is document fraud, the assistant prosecutor said, confused. Exactly, Helen agreed, and we ask for an investigation. The interrogation dragged on for 3 hours. The assistant prosecutor left several times to consult with his superiors. It was clear he didn't know how to proceed with the information received. Finally, he returned and said, "An inspection will be conducted based on your application, and regarding Alan's statement, we will refrain from opening a case for now until all circumstances are clarified." Leaving the prosecutor's office, Helen felt a strange relief. For the first time, their version had been heard officially, not dismissed, not hushed up. "I think Sutton Harris's publication played its role," Luke Lopez said. "The prosecutor's office doesn't want to look like accomplices to corruption. Indeed, the article in the regional newspaper had the effect of a bombshell. Medical swindlers drive old people out of their native villages," was the headline on the front page of a detailed piece about the fraud scheme. The article mentioned the names of all participants in the scheme, including Deputy Mr. Remington. The reaction was not long in coming. The very next day, a commission from the regional health department arrived in the village. Alan was suspended from work pending investigation. The district chief physician was summoned to the region for explanations. But Mr. Remington and his team were not going to give up without a fight. 2 days later, a press conference was held in the region where the deputy stated that he was a victim of an information attack by competitors. He claimed he had never had anything to do with paramedic Alan's activities, and all land transactions were completely legal. "People who envy my business success are trying to slander me," Mr. Remington told journalists. "I am ready to answer for my words in court." Simultaneously, a massive attack on Sutton Harris began. Materials discrediting her reputation appeared online. She was accused of bias, of taking money from Mr. Remington's competitors, even of personal animosity toward the deputy. "This is standard tactic," the journalist told Helen over the phone. "When there's nothing to say on the substance, they attack the author, but I'm ready for this." Meanwhile, the inspection by the regional health department gained momentum. The commission had been working for a week already, interviewing patients, studying medical documents, checking the qualifications of medical staff. The results were even worse than Helen had assumed. It turned out Alan had no right to make many of the diagnoses that appeared in his reports. A paramedic can provide first aid and conduct simple examinations, but oncological diagnoses can only be made by an oncologist after special tests. Moreover, serious violations in medical documentation were discovered. Many of the tests Alan referred to were either not conducted at all, or their results were distorted. The chief physician of the district hospital tried to blame everything on the paramedic. Alan worked independently. We didn't control his every step. He's an experienced medical worker. We trusted him. But the commission quickly found that the chief physician couldn't have been unaware of the violations. Too many complaints had been received from patients. The discrepancies in documents were too obvious. In the second week of the inspection, the regional prosecutor's office joined the work. A criminal case was initiated under Articles Fraud and Abuse of Official Powers. Alan was detained right at his workplace. During a search of his home, documents confirming his connection to Garcia's firms were found, as well as a large sum of money, over 1 million rubles in cash. "Where would a rural paramedic get such money?" the investigators asked him. "I saved up," Alan answered. "On a salary of 20,000 rubles in 15 years, you could save a maximum of 300,000 if you spent nothing on living at all." Alan understood he was caught, but continued to deny his guilt. He claimed he always made diagnoses in good faith, and if patients sold their houses, that was their personal business. The paramedics' arrest became a signal for other participants in the scheme. Garcia tried to flee abroad, but was detained at the airport. During a search of his office, documents were found indicating systematic payments to medical workers for consulting services. Mr. Remington remained free for now. Parliamentary immunity protected him from arrest, but the prosecutor's office had already prepared a submission to the Regional Assembly to strip him of his deputy mandate. Life in Riverbend gradually returned to normal. Grace Green felt better with each day. The simple treatment for gastritis that Helen prescribed worked wonders. The old woman gained weight, her complexion improved, she became more active. "Helen Mitchell," she said one morning, "I want to ask you something." "I'm listening." "Haven't you thought about staying in our village forever? You see, people love you, respect you. You're needed here." Helen thought about it. Indeed, over the past months, she had felt needed as never before in the New York clinic. Here, every piece of advice was important, every word carried weight. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I haven't thought that far ahead yet." "And you should. Luke Lopez, for example, asks about you very often." Helen was surprised. "In what sense?" "In the most direct sense. He's a good man, decent. His wife was wonderful. May she rest in peace, but life goes on, and it's hard to be alone in a house." Helen blushed. She had noticed that Luke Lopez indeed began to visit more often, to consult about the case or just to drink tea. Their conversations stretched for hours. They talked not only about the investigation, but also about books, life, plans for the future. Grace Green, "Don't." "I will, dear, I will. At our age, it's foolish to waste time. Both you and he are over 50. Good people, you suit each other. What are you waiting for?" That evening, Luke Lopez indeed came to visit. They sat in the kitchen drinking tea with gooseberry jam that Grace Green had made. "Helen Mitchell," he said suddenly, "I want to ask you something." Her heart beat faster. Was Grace Green right? "What do you want to ask?" "Haven't you thought about staying here in our district? We really need a doctor, especially one like you." "In what sense?" "In the direct sense. I spoke with the new district head who came after all these scandals. He's ready to offer you the position of head of the medical station with a good salary and official housing." "Official housing?" "Or you can stay here with Grace Green. She says the house is now yours together." Helen looked at Luke Lopez and suddenly understood that the question wasn't just about work. There was warmth in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. Not passion, not infatuation, but something deeper, understanding, respect, readiness to go through life together. "And what do you think?" she asked. "Should I stay?" "I think you should," he answered quietly. "But not only because of the work. Then why else?" "Because I would be very sad if you left." This wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something more important. An acknowledgement that she had become part of his life, that her presence was important and valuable. "I'll think about it," Helen said. "Honestly, I'll think about it." And the next morning came news that finally decided her fate. The phone rang at 7 in the morning. Helen was sleeping soundly. For the first time in many months, she wasn't tormented by anxious dreams, didn't have nightmares about sick patients and an unfaithful husband. Grace Green was already up and bustling in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "Helen Mitchell, telephone," the old woman called. "They say it's from New York." Helen threw on a robe and took the receiver. The voice was unfamiliar. A young man introducing himself as an assistant to the New York City prosecutor. "Helen Mitchell, Ms. Sawyer. You filed for divorce from citizen Ian Thompson." "Yes, I did." "What's happened?" "You see, there's a need for your consultation. Your ex-husband has been arrested on suspicion of fraud on a particularly large scale. The investigation asks you to come to New York to give testimony." Helen sat down on a chair. Ian arrested? For what? What exactly is he accused of? Creating a financial pyramid. He attracted investors' money for the construction of shopping centers, but no construction was carried out, and the money was spent on personal needs. The damage amounts to over 100 million rubles. But what does that have to do with me? We've been divorced for 6 months. The fact is that part of the funds was transferred to accounts registered in your name. We need to understand if you knew about this. Helen's ears rang. Ian had registered something in her name. When? Why? I don't know anything about any accounts, she exclaimed. We haven't spoken in 6 months. Exactly why we need your testimony to clear you of suspicion and confirm you were not an accomplice. When do I need to come? The sooner the better. The case has received significant public resonance. Many victims are demanding compensation. Hanging up, Helen sat in silence for a long time. So Ian not only cheated on her, but also dragged her into some criminal schemes. Good thing she left his life in time. What happened, dear? Grace Green worried. You're so pale. Helen told her about the call. The old woman gasped. Oh, goodness, what kind of people are these? First one swindler shows up here, now another in New York. Grace Green, I'll have to go. Give testimony, sort out these accounts. Of course, go. And I'll look after the house here. But you must come back. Hear me? There was fear in the old woman's voice. Over these months, they had become like family to each other, and Grace Green was afraid that New York problems would take Helen away from the village forever. An hour later, Luke Lopez's car pulled up to the house. He came, as usual, for morning tea and to discuss the latest news on the Allen case. But seeing the packed suitcases, he was taken aback. You're leaving? Helen told him about the call from the prosecutor's office. Luke Lopez listened with growing anxiety. I see, he said finally. So you are leaving after all. It won't be for long. I'll give testimony and return. And if you don't return? He asked quietly. If there are reasons to stay in New York? There won't be, Helen said firmly. My life is here now. Honestly? Honestly. He suddenly took her hand. Helen Mitchell, I want you to know I will be waiting for you very much. We all will be waiting. The village won't be the same without you. I will definitely return, she promised, feeling her heart fill with warmth. I have a home here and people who are dear to me. The road to New York took 6 hours. Helen drove, thinking about how her life had changed in these 6 months. 6 months ago, she was a successful New York doctor, the wife of a prosperous businessman, lived in a prestigious area, and now a rural doctor living in a wooden house with stove heating. And the strange thing was, she was happier than ever. In New York, she was met by an alien, cold atmosphere, a huge city in different faces, hustle, smog. How could she have lived here? How did she not notice this deadness? The prosecutor's office was located in a gloomy Stalin-era building. The investigator, a middle-aged woman, tired and worn out, explained the details of the case. Your ex-husband created several firms that allegedly were engaged in building shopping centers in suburban cities, she explained, showing folders with documents. He attracted investors promising high profits. People invested their savings, pensions, sold apartments. And what then? And then it turned out there was no construction. The money was spent on buying expensive cars, elite real estate, travel. Just the cars alone cost 3 million rubles. And what does that have to do with me? Some of the firms were registered in your name. You were listed as the founder of 2 companies. Bank accounts were opened using your passport. Helen gasped. She had no idea about any firms. That's impossible. I never signed anything. Exactly why we called you. We suspect the documents were forged. We need your statement that you did not consent to the use of your data. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. Helen detailed her life with Ian, how he could have gained access to her documents, that she was never interested in his business. "Did you have a power of attorney for family matters?" the investigator asked. "Yes, I did. For buying an apartment, arranging loans." "That's the answer. He used that power of attorney to create firms, and you didn't notice anything." "I worked from morning till night, was rarely home. I trusted my husband." "I see. Unfortunately, such cases are common. Husbands register businesses in their wives' names so that in case of problems they can shift the blame onto them." After the interrogation, Helen felt drained. So Ian not only cheated on her, but also set her up for criminal liability. Good thing she'd left his life in time. Outside it was November, cold, gray, wet. Helen walked through familiar places and didn't recognize them. There was the house where she lived with Ian. Now, probably his young wife and child lived there. There was the clinic where she worked. Lights were on in the windows. Doctors were seeing patients. She went into the clinic. Colleagues greeted her joyfully. "Lena, how good that you came. We missed you so much." "How are things in the village?" asked Natasha, the young doctor. "Not tired of digging gardens yet?" "Had enough playing peasant?" laughed Chief Physician Caleb Allen. "Return to normal life. Your place is waiting." Normal life, a prestigious job, good salary, career prospects, everything millions of people dream of. But for some reason to Helen it seemed unreal, artificial. "Thank you," she said. "But I've already found my place." "In the village?" Caleb Allen was surprised. "What did you forget there? What prospects do you have? What future?" "Good prospects and a good future." That evening she stayed in a hotel. The room was comfortable with a panoramic view of the city. Helen stood by the window, looked at the lights of New York, and thought about quiet evenings in the village, about tea with Grace Green, about long conversations with Luke Lopez, Sutton Harris, the journalist called her. "Helen Mitchell, how are you? I heard you're in New York." Yes, family circumstances. I have good news for you. Mr. Remington has been stripped of his deputy mandate. They'll arrest him tomorrow." "That's really good news. And even better, the whole scheme has collapsed. In other districts, they've also arrested doctors who gave false diagnoses. I think you saved dozens of families." "We saved. Not me alone." "Of course. By the way, when are you returning?" Luke Lopez called, asked. "I'm leaving tomorrow." "Don't want to stay in New York. Number my home is in Riverbend now." The next day, before leaving, Helen decided to visit her ex-husband in the detention center. The meeting lasted only half an hour, but that was enough to finally be convinced. She had made the right choice by leaving him. Ian looked aged, haggard. His expensive suit was replaced by standard-issue clothing. His self-confidence was gone. "Lena," he said when he saw her, "good that you came. I need your help." "What help?" "Money for a lawyer, a good lawyer. They assigned some free idiot." "But you had a young rich wife. Ask her." "Vicky?" He smiled bitterly. "She ran away as soon as she found out about the arrest, took the child and disappeared. Even changed her number." "I see. And you're counting on my help?" "You understand. I didn't mean to set you up. I just needed to put the documents in someone's name, and you were my wife." "Was. Now I'm not, and I won't help." "Lena, but we lived together for 20 years. "Yes, we lived. And in those 20 years I realized you think only about yourself. When things were good, you left me. Now, when things are bad, you remembered. I didn't know it would turn out like this. You knew you were deceiving people, knew you forged documents in my name and kept silent." Ian lowered his head. He had nothing to say. "Goodbye, Ian," Helen said, standing up. "I hope you get what you deserve." Leaving the detention center, she felt a strange relief. The last connection with her past life was broken. Now she was truly free. The road home, yes, home, seemed short. Helen drove and rejoiced at every kilometer, bringing her closer to the village. There was the regional center, familiar turns, native places. In Riverbend, she was welcomed as a heroine. Grace Green cried with joy. Neighbors came out to greet her. Even the local dogs barked joyfully. "I thought you wouldn't return," the old woman admitted. "Thought New York would take you back." "New York is my past," Helen said, "and the future is here." That evening, Luke Lopez came. He brought a bouquet of late asters, the last flowers of autumn. How are things in New York?" he asked. "Sorted everything out. Now I'm completely free." "And what have you decided? About work, about the future?" Helen looked at him and suddenly understood that the decision had already been made by the heart, not the mind. "I'm staying. Forever." Honestly, are you happy?" "Very." He took her hand. "To be honest, I was afraid you'd change your mind, that you'd understand. We're all simple village folk here." "Luke Lopez," Helen interrupted him, "over these months I've understood one thing. The most complex and intelligent people often turn out to be the most empty, and the simplest, the most genuine. And you won't be bored without theaters, without restaurants, without city entertainment. I'll be interested. We have such things happening here. No theater is needed." He laughed. "That's true, especially after the story with Alan." "And how is he, by the way?" "In jail. The trial is set for December. He'll probably get 5 years. And Mr. Remington got 8 years in a strict regime colony." "Fair. And most importantly, people are starting to return. Maria has already arranged to buy back her house. For more money, of course, but still. Good. So our struggle was not in vain." "Not in vain," Luke Lopez agreed. "By the way, a commission from the region is coming tomorrow to decide about the medical station. If you agree to work, in a month there will be a real outpatient clinic here." "I agree, without hesitation," Helen said. "And I haven't even told you the conditions yet." "Doesn't matter. Any conditions are better than a life without meaning." He looked at her for a long time, then suddenly leaned over and kissed her on the forehead, carefully, tenderly, like a father kissing a daughter. "You know, Helen Mitchell," he said quietly, "I'm very glad you came to us, very glad you're staying." "And I'm glad," she answered, truly glad for the first time in many years. Outside, the first snow was falling, soft, fluffy, covering the ground with a white blanket. Winter was beginning, but it was warm and cozy in the house. Tea steamed on the table. Dear people sat nearby, and a new life awaited ahead. Not easy, but honest, not rich, but happy. "And remember," Grace Green said, pouring tea into cups, "how you arrived 6 months ago. So lost, so sad. And now look at yourself." Helen indeed looked at herself in the mirror. Her face had gained color from the village air. Her eyes sparkled. A sparkle had appeared in them that hadn't been there for many years. "Yes," she agreed, "I've changed a lot, and you know what? I like it. And we like it," Luke Lopez added. "We like it very much." The snow outside continued to fall, covering the village in quiet whiteness. And in the house, the light was on. And 3 people drank tea, made plans for the future, and were truly happy. Because happiness isn't necessarily big money and high positions. Sometimes it's just a warm home, good people nearby, and the feeling that you're in the right place.